Captain Elias Grant had spent the last 4 years hiding from the galaxy, tucked away on the edge of a quiet colony where stars passed slowly and silence filled the air more than voices ever did. A former war hero turned engineer, he had buried his past beneath layers of dust and metal scraps, fixing broken machines to forget the broken pieces inside himself. That morning started like any other with black coffee, a soft breeze, and the hum of solar panels, but it shattered when a shadow moved across his sky. A massive alien vessel, sleek and silver with wings like crystal sails, landed just meters from his home. Before he could even speak, figures emerged, tall, graceful beings with shimmering carapaces and glowing eyes. They were Sorellans, the royal race known across the stars for both their power and their pride, and among them stood one he never expected to see, the Sorellan queen herself. She was towering and strange, yet elegant in a way that made the air feel heavier. She stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding, as if carved from the wind itself. "Human," she said, "my daughter needs you." Elias froze. His mug slipped from his fingers and shattered against the ground. He hadn't spoken to anyone in months, let alone royalty from a species who barely trusted humans. Still, there was something in her voice, urgency, desperation, and a strange softness that didn't match her title. She explained that her daughter, Princess Lyra, had fallen ill with a rare empathic disease. It was something that attacked the mind, not the body, and Sorellan medicine had failed. The only hope, she claimed, was to find someone with deep emotional resonance, someone who had survived pain, carried loss, and still held onto something human. Elias tried to say no. He wasn't a healer. He wasn't a savior. He was a broken man with too many ghosts. But when she showed him a hologram of Lyra, curled and trembling in a chamber of light, something stirred inside him. Her eyes, huge and glassy, were not so different from those of the wounded soldiers he once tried to save. Against his own instincts, Elias agreed, and before the sun could finish rising, he was aboard the alien ship, leaving behind his quiet exile. Inside, the air smelled of strange flowers and pulsed with soft light. Alien symbols blinked around him, and silent Sorellans watched his every move, their expressions unreadable. The Queen spoke only once more before they entered. Faster than light travel. "She remembers you, Elias Grant," she said. "Though she was young when she saw what you did, the memory stayed." He didn't understand, but the words clung to him like frost. As the ship hurtled through space, he stared out the window, watching stars become lines, and wondered what kind of memory had bound a Sorellan princess to a forgotten human like him. Suspense grew inside him like a slow storm. What did she remember? What had he done that could connect their fates? And why did it feel like this was not a mission, but something more, a reckoning, a return, a chapter waiting to be reopened? The answers waited on the other side of the stars. The alien ship slid silently through the dark void, stars flashing by as Elias stood at the viewing window, feeling both small and uncertain. He didn't belong here among royal guards with glowing armor, on a ship filled with silent judgment and strange smells, but something deep inside told him this journey was meant to happen. When the ship arrived at the Sorellan capital, the view took his breath away. The city was a living hive of light and crystal towers, floating platforms, and glowing bridges that connected massive spires like strands of silk. But the beauty faded. The moment they led him to the princess's chamber, it was dim, cold, and quiet. Lyra lay suspended in a chamber of soft blue light, her delicate limbs curled like a dying flower, her once bright eyes now dull and barely open. Elias stepped closer and saw not just weakness, but pain, a deep, quiet suffering that felt far too familiar. The Sorellan healers explained that the disease was unlike anything they'd faced. It attacked the mind, not the body, and it fed on silence, secrets, and suppressed emotion. Lyra had always been different, they said, more empathic than her kind usually were, and at a certain incident during the war, she had begun to fall into a quiet, frozen state. That's when Elias felt a chill in his spine. He had been in many battles, had seen things no one should see, but the war with the Sorellans had left one moment etched into his memory, saving a group of alien civilians during an attack, shielding them with his body, and locking eyes with a terrified young Sorellan girl before he passed out from blood loss. Could that girl have been her? Could that memory have taken root inside the princess and grown into something too strong to handle? The queen confirmed it. She never forgot you, she whispered, and she tried to bury the emotion so deep that it nearly destroyed her. Elias felt the weight of her words settle into his chest. He wasn't just here to help, he was part of the reason she was dying. The Sorellans revealed a risky method called neural resonance, an old tech, long abandoned, that allowed minds to temporarily merge. Elias agreed without hesitation, even though he knew the risks. Once connected, their minds became one flowing stream of thoughts, and Elias was pulled into Lyra's memories like a diver falling into deep water. He saw flashes of her childhood in the palace, her secret curiosity about humans, and then clear as day the moment she saw him bleeding on the ground, shielding her from falling rubble. Her young mind had clung to the image of the brave, broken man, and the guilt of surviving while he almost died had eaten away at her for years. Inside that mental space, Elias reached for her with quiet strength, not as a soldier, but as someone who understood pain. He let her see his own past, his mistakes, regrets, and the nightmares he never escaped. And somehow, slowly, the walls around her mind began to crack. The light inside the chamber flickered. Her fingers twitched, a faint breath escaped her lips. The healers gasped, but Elias kept his focus. Their bond was working, but it wasn't just healing, it was changing them both. Through her memories, he saw how much the war had hurt the Sorellans too, how much she had feared her own people's coldness, how much she longed to feel something pure. And through his emotions, she saw that humans were more than fighters, they were carriers of memory, love, and pain. When the connection ended, Elias collapsed from exhaustion. But when he opened his eyes, Lyra's were open to faintly glowing, no longer empty. He had reached her, but he also knew something dark was hiding in the silence of the palace. The disease may have started with a memory, but something else had allowed it to grow, a secret, buried deep in the halls of Sorellan power. And Elias had the feeling that the closer he got to Lyra, the more danger they were both in. The past wasn't done with them yet. Elias woke in a quiet chamber, his head heavy and heart pounding, unsure how long he had been unconscious after the mind merge with the princess. But as soon as his eyes adjusted to the soft silver light, he realized something had changed. Lyra was no longer in her chamber, and the air around him felt colder, heavier, like something was watching. He pushed himself up and stepped into the corridor, where two royal guards stood silently there, expressions unreadable. They told him the queen had summoned him, but the way they avoided his gaze made his instincts scream that something was wrong. As he walked through the glowing halls of the palace, he overheard fragments of hushed conversations, words like threat, outsider, and emotional contamination. He had only come to help, yet it felt like the walls themselves had turned against him. When he finally reached the queen's throne room, it was empty, save for an old Sorellan historian named Kelworth, who looked nervous and motioned him to speak in whispers. The queen was missing, he said, and only a few knew the truth. There had been whispers of rebellion growing for years, led by a council of elders who believed the Sorellan way was weakening because of emotional influence, especially from humans. The princess, with her empathic nature and mysterious bond with Elias, had become a symbol of unwanted change. And Elias, the human with the memory that lived inside her, was the key they feared. Kelworth handed him a small crystal orb, an old recording left by the queen just before she vanished. When Elias activated it, her voice filled the chamber, low and filled with urgency. She spoke of a secret faction within her own court, those who wanted the old ways to return, free of emotional weakness, even if it meant silencing her and letting her daughter fade. She begged Elias to protect Lyra, to take her somewhere safe, far from the traitors hiding behind royal robes. But Lyra was already gone, taken during the night by those who saw her as a threat. Elias's heart pounded with a growing fire. He had no weapons, no allies, and no idea where they had taken her. But he refused to leave her behind. He returned to her chamber and searched for anything they might have missed, eventually finding a small trail of crystal dust, a rare substance used only by old palace guards who still swore loyalty to the queen. Following it through secret halls and twisting stairwells, Elias moved deeper into the palace's underbelly, past forgotten statues and broken light panels, until he found a locked gate humming with old energy. With Kelrith's help, he bypassed the lock and entered a dark chamber where he finally found her. Lyra was trapped inside a mind prison, a cage of swirling light meant to suppress emotions completely. Her body was limp, her eyes closed, and her presence barely there. Elias stepped closer, and the room reacted, pulsing with heat and pressure. A voice echoed behind him. It was High Elder Verax, the leader of the secret rebellion. The elder was tall and cold, his voice sharp as ice. He claimed Elias had poisoned the royal bloodline with human weakness, and that Lyra's connection to him threatened the survival of their species. Elias didn't argue. He stepped forward, pressed his hand against the cage, and let his thoughts flow. He thought of Earth, of his losses, of the wars, and of the one moment when he chose to shield a frightened child rather than fight. That memory, bright and raw, burned through the cage like fire. The light cracked, and Lyra stirred, her eyes fluttering open. The moment their gaze met, the cage shattered, and a shockwave knocked Verax to the floor. Guards rushed in, weapons raised, but then something strange happened. Lyra stood, her voice strong and clear, and every Cirellan in the room froze. She wasn't just a princess anymore. Something in her had awakened. Her empathy had evolved, her strength now undeniable, and she commanded them to stand down. Elias watched, breathless, as the rebels hesitated. And then, one by one, they obeyed. But it wasn't over. Somewhere deeper in the palace, more secrets were buried, and Elias knew that if they didn't uncover the full truth soon, the rebellion would rise again, stronger, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone expected. The palace halls were still, trembling from the psychic shockwave that had shattered the mind prison and exposed the hidden rebellion. And though the traitors had lowered their weapons, Elias knew this was only a pause, not the end. Lyra stood with quiet strength, her eyes glowing with a strange new light, but her body was weak, and Elias had to steady her as they left the ruined chamber behind. Word of her awakening spread fast, and soon whispers filled the air, some in awe, others in fear. Loyalists knelt in respect, but others watched from the shadows, faces hard and unreadable. Back in her private chamber, guarded tightly now, Lyra confessed to Elias that she had seen something while trapped, visions of her mother not dead, but hidden, in exile, waiting for the right moment to return. The queen, it seemed, had not been overthrown outright, but had chosen to vanish after sensing the rebellion forming under her very feet. Knowing that a direct confrontation would spark a civil war that might destroy their people forever, she had trusted Lyra to one day awaken and make the choice she herself could not: to lead, to heal, or to fight. With only vague images from Lyra's vision to guide them, Elias and a small group of loyalists set out into the hidden layers of the Cirellan world, into the ruins of an old temple buried beneath the city, a place once used by royal seers and long forbidden. There, they found her. The queen stood among broken statues and dim crystals, dressed not in gold but in gray robes, her face older, her eyes sharper. She embraced Lyra, but said nothing to Elias at first. Only after the silence grew heavy did she speak, revealing that she had once used the same mind link that Elias had shared with Lyra. Long ago, she had linked with a human general to stop a war, and though that link had saved millions, it had cost her dearly. Her people never fully forgave her for letting a human inside her mind. Now history was repeating, and she feared her daughter would face the same betrayal. Lyra refused to be silent. She spoke of what she had felt in Elias's memories, grief, yes, but also courage and hope. She said she was no longer a child of fear, but a leader of change. The queen listened in silence, then finally turned to Elias and asked him the question he had feared. If it came to war again, would you protect her, even against your own kind? Elias didn't hesitate. I would protect her from anyone who sees her as a tool, not a person. The queen studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. She gave Lyra a crystal pendant, an ancient device that symbolized the right to choose her own path, even if it defied the old laws. The queen would stay in exile, she said, to keep peace for now, but Lyra must be the one to stand before the people and declare the future. As they returned to the palace, tension gripped the city like a storm waiting to break. News of Lyra's survival had spread to the council, and Elder Verax had not disappeared. He had gone underground, gathering supporters, twisting fear into anger. The queen's choice had been made, but the real test lay ahead. Lyra would have to stand before her people, speak not just as royalty, but as one who had walked through darkness and come back changed. Elias remained by her side, not as a warrior or a savior, but as someone who had found his own truth in the fire of someone else's pain. Together, they walked into the great council chamber, where silence fell like a blade, and every eye turned to them. The queen had chosen peace, but peace, they both knew, was never given freely. It had to be claimed. The grand chamber of the High Council was filled with quiet tension as Lyra stepped forward, her silver robes trailing behind her like the fading winds of an ancient storm, and Elias walked beside her, silent but firm, knowing every eye in the room watched him not as a guest, but as a symbol of fear, of change, of the unknown. The elders sat tall and proud, their faces unreadable, but Verax was not among them, which made Elias uneasy, for he knew a man like Verax would not stay silent while his power slipped away. Lyra took her place at the center of the circle, holding the ancient pendant her mother had given her, and began to speak not like a child of royalty, but like someone who had faced death, betrayal, and truth. She spoke of the pain she had felt in Elias's mind and the courage she had seen in his heart, how the link between their worlds had revealed not weakness, but strength, empathy, trust, and a deep need for understanding. Some elders shifted uncomfortably, others looked away, but Lyra did not pause. She declared that the future of their people could no longer be built on cold reason alone, but needed the warmth of emotion, the lessons of loss and love, and the willingness to grow beyond old traditions. The chamber fell silent, but before anyone could respond, a sudden tremor shook the ground, and distant alarms echoed through the palace walls. A message arrived quickly. Verax had launched a final strike, activating an ancient war machine hidden beneath the city's foundations, something from the days before peace, something powerful enough to destroy not only the palace, but the very balance of the world. Chaos erupted as the council scattered, but Lyra stood firm, her hands trembling only slightly as she turned to Elias. They ran together through secret tunnels, guided by Kelrith, who had learned of Verax's plan too late. The machine pulsed, with red energy, its core building toward a massive explosion, and Verax stood at its center, his body already fused with the old technology, his voice twisted by rage. He shouted that emotion had doomed their people once and would do so again, that the future must be built on strength, not sympathy. Elias stepped forward, unarmed but unshaken, and spoke not to Verax, but to the people watching through the emergency transmissions now broadcast across the city. He told them what he had seen in Lyra's mind, her pain, her doubts, her dreams, and how no machine, no council, no law could stop a soul from choosing hope over hate. Lyra then raised the pendant, which began to glow, reacting to the ancient systems around them. It was more than a symbol. It was a key, a control device, one last safeguard from the time when Sorellen still believed in redemption. She reached for the machine, placing the pendant into the heart of the energy core, and for a moment everything froze. The machine's pulse slowed, flickered, and then collapsed into silence. Verax screamed, his body rejecting the shutdown, and in a final surge of light, he he vanished, consumed by the very force he had tried to control. As the dust settled, the lights in the chamber returned, dim but steady, and the danger was gone. The people of Sorella emerged from their homes and watched the broadcast end with Lyra standing beside Elias, the symbol of a choice made not in war, but in unity. In the days that followed, the council reformed, with Lyra at its heart. Some elders stepped down, others took oaths to follow the new vision, one that welcomed change without erasing tradition. Elias remained not as a visitor, but as a bridge between worlds. He helped build programs that brought humans and Sorellans together not just in politics, but in learning, medicine, and culture. There were still challenges, old wounds that would take time to heal. But for the first time, two civilizations stood side by side, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. And late at night, under the twin moons of Sorella, Lyra and Elias would sit beneath the crystal trees, speaking softly of all they had endured, and all that was yet to come. They had no map, no guarantee, but they had something stronger, a bond born of truth, tested by fire, and strengthened by hope. A new future had begun, one built not by one world alone, but by two hearts that refused to let fear win.